It came about quite by accident. It came from beneath the sea. I was working on my fairy tales at home. I think it was Little Red Riding Hood or one of the other, I'm not sure. It's so long ago. And I got this call from a friend that I happened to be in the Army with. And he said that he was working at Columbia with Sam Katzman. And there's a young producer who would like to make a picture about a giant octopus pulling down the Golden Gate Bridge. And that made me pick up. I thought, good, that sounds like something I'd be interested in. And so I went over to Columbia and met this gentleman, and his name was Charles Schneer. And we made a number of pictures together over the years. But at the time, he was under contract to Sam Katzman, who made low-budget pictures and tried to use sets that the A Pictures could amortize between the two films. Charles had seen The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and was very interested in the technique of dynamation. And he finally brought out a rough script, and I found it very interesting and a challenge. So I accepted doing It Came from Beneath the Sea. Charles Schneer's actual offices were in Columbia Pictures lot, and but I didn't want to work on the lot, so we discussed the possibilities of making this picture, and I told him I'd like to work alone and where I'd like to have my studio. So I rented a store. I had to have a long store, and there was a store that just came on the market on Washington Boulevard in Culver City. So I rented that store and got a camera from Columbia Studios, and I had my stop motion motors from The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which came from Willis O'Brien's project, Mighty Joe Young. And I brought my projector there and made the film at this little store on Washington Boulevard. I think it only took about 7 or 8 months to finish all the cuts that I had. Charles took charge of the live action and kept the budget down on that. So we worked quite well together, although we were separate. I was down in Culver City and he was up in Hollywood. But I would give my dailies, send them to Hollywood by courier, and we worked out the whole picture that way.
Well, the first time I think I became aware of Ray Harryhausen, or at least his work, was on a family outing. I'm from Northern California, near Walnut Creek. I was raised there. And every Sunday we'd go visit our family, other family members in San Francisco. And it was always a big event because we would take the ferry to Sausalito from the Richmond side and then drive across the Golden Gate Bridge into the city. And I always was excited about that, especially driving across the bridge. It was always, I mean, I'm excited driving across it today, but that particular day, on Sunday, we were going to see a film that my father was desperate to see called It Came from Beneath the Sea. Well, as you know, that's a film where a giant octopus tears down the bridge. The movie scared me when I saw it, but the thing that was much more disturbing was the drive home, which, of course, we had to drive across the bridge to get there. And I wasn't quite sure what I had seen in the movie. Did that happen, or was it about to happen? So the drive across the bridge was quite nervous-making for me, because I remember it. So I was only like 4 or 5 years old. So, so years later, actually, I met Ray at an event, and I told him this story. I said, I actually have to say that I think it's what got me interested in visual effects. Like, how did that happen? What happened? How did you do that? What did I see? I mean, it clearly stuck in my head as a young boy.
Well, with It Came Beneath the Sea, we had a giant octopus that was supposed to have come from an explosion underneath the water. And it made the octopus there grow to giant size because no one quite knew what the effects of radiation would do at the time. So it was, again, an unknown quality. So we could make the octopus any size we wanted, which would be more dramatic. So I did a lot of research down at the Long Beach Aquarium, and I realized the octopuses didn't have their bag, so-called bag, which is their body, upright, as the cartoons, many Popeye cartoons, displayed the octopus with its head up and tentacles flying out from the bottom. He looked like a fire plug. And that gave me some ideas of how the octopus would move. I worked very close with the writer on this project and storyboarded a great deal of it, and then he would incorporate it into the script. So a lot of it came from my imagination as well as his. But his job was very important because he had to string the whole idea together so that it would be a logical progressive. We wanted to make it like a documentary because at that time, as I said, what would happen under the sea if a bomb exploded there, an atomic bomb, was an unknown quantity. And they had just exploded one, I believe, on Christmas Island or somewhere at the time. So it was we wanted to keep that mystery throughout the thing by making it a documentary type experience. Some of the live action shots were done. I had to make rear projection plates, so I was busy in my little studio producing these rear projection plates, which would be at the end of the production, so that they had the actors there. And so I was busy making them. He shot some of the submarine things down in San Pedro, I believe there's a submarine harbor, either San Pedro or Long Beach. It's so long ago I can't remember. But the interiors of the submarine were actually shot in a submarine that was dry docked at the harbor.
I want 2 Aqualung volunteers to blast us loose. Get in your gear and stand by the escape hatch. Take a demolition charge. I'll take over. Aye, aye, Captain.
When I designed the octopus, I thought, oh my gosh, animating 8 tentacles is going to be a bit of a problem. So I thought, well, half of him is underwater most of the time. So I cut off 2 tentacles and made him a sextopus. Nobody knew this until I happened to mention it in an interview many months later, that he only had 6 arms. Nobody knew this except me. And unfortunately, it was published in a magazine, so it got to be a rumor that our octopus only had 6 tentacles. And then somebody came out with the idea that it was only 5. So if we'd cut the budget anymore, he would have looked like a tripod. Well, the budget was so low on It Came From Beneath the Sea that we could only have 1 model. And that was it. We did all the close-ups on it, and we made a section of the model for the eye opening that was a very small section, and on a bigger scale. But that was a very rare shot. We had large tentacles, 2 or 3 large tentacles, just for close-ups, because we wanted more detail in the sucker sections of the octopus's tentacle. And they were mainly used for projection plates when they came up behind the actors in the boat. And so I had to get those shot first so that they could use it at the end of production when they shoot all the rear projection shots. One of the difficult things in animating an octopus underwater is the slow movement of the tentacles. And sometimes you have to double frame it, and that gives it a slightly jerky effect. Double framing means you shoot 2 frames of one movement. As you know, the octopus had all jointed tentacles, and each time you move it a fraction of an inch, you shoot 2 frames instead of 1, which slows the action down. But it has a tendency to make it a little jerky. But I try to avoid it in most cases, but sometimes you can only move at 1 millimeter a frame, which is a very small move. And to get slow motion, you have to have more frames. And for fast motion, you have less. So that became a challenge, particularly when it was underwater. We didn't have the model in water, as you might think. We used a distortion glass many times to give the wave effect, the ripply effect underwater. But it was all shot dry. We had some underwater stock footage that we used as projection plates, and then put the ripple glass in between the camera and the projection and the octopus. The octopus was on a table. There was a projection screen just behind it, and with the projector projecting the picture underwater. And then the camera here would photograph the combination. And each frame of film, you'd move the glass, which had a slight ripple in it, and it gave it that undersea look. In those days, we had to do the split screen in the camera. I usually had a matting glass in the foreground, and I would mat out certain sections of the live action projection that was in the background, and then substitute a miniature for that section. And then I would wind the film back and cover up the other section that had already been photographed, and then photograph the rear projection screen again with the people running out. So if you do it correctly, you shouldn't see the join between the miniature and the live action footage. We tried to avoid retakes. Practically everything you see in the film was the first take. We had an occasional retake if we had a technical problems, such as sometimes you get a weave where if you expose the film twice, you can see where the join is because the 2 films move. We solved that problem by finding out that we had to use the film that was punched 20,000 feet that was punched the first when the punch was new, because as they keep punching the sprocket holes, they get wider and wider because the friction on so multiple pressures. So we try to use the first 20,000 feet so that we don't have a weave in the double exposure. Sometimes we have to expose it 3 or 4 times in order to get certain effects. And so that's very important that it's accurate, so you don't see all the separate pieces moving that were exposed separately. When the octopus comes into San Francisco Bay and starts destroying the city, we had a section of miniature, as you see behind me, that was built especially so that with wires in each section of the building, it was pre-broken, pre-cut, and then covered up and put together with copper wires, made so that you wouldn't see the sections at first until we actually did the animation. So a big tentacle, of course, came out through this particular section, and I had to substitute a miniature for the real a building that we photographed in San Francisco. And through a matting process, I was able to combine the live actors screaming and running and falling down with this miniature where the tentacle came through the arch. Consuming time came about by having to make tests to be sure that this miniature would match the projection plate that was on the background in density and in appearance, so that you wouldn't know that it was a miniature. With the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, again, we had a cameraman shoot certain angles that I had photographed ahead of time when I was looking for locations. And then I would take that and put the miniature in the foreground and use the projection plate of the bridge in the background. And the foreground miniature would cover up the section that was already on the projection screen. So then through a matting process, you would mat the water in with foam, because when the octopus came up, there had to be a little foam around him. So that all had to be put in on a separate pass, as we call it, where you do the animation and then you wind the film back and then you project against black with just the waves, the bubbling waves that were pre-shot, and put those in where the octopus is, so it looks like the octopus is disturbing the water. The bridge was, as I say, a miniature about 2.5 feet high. Forey Ackerman, I believe, had it, and I think Peter Jackson may have the original. I gave it to Forey some time ago, and I believe Peter Jackson bought a lot of Forey's collection. So it may be in New Zealand, I don't know. But it was so big I couldn't store it in my garage or anything. But it was made of lead, and the octopus would gradually crush it. Each frame of film, you would make it look like the octopus tentacle was squeezing, and you'd push in on the lead just maybe a millimeter or 2 millimeters. And then each frame of film, finally the tentacle gave the impression that it was crushing the Golden Gate Bridge.
Ray was very sensitive to how a creature would move and react, and then just an ordinary, opaque structure, such as a bridge or your average coliseum or something like that. So there's a difference in timing, there's a difference in texture, there's a difference in spacing. How the character is moving perhaps, in a biological way, a sensuous way, S-shapes sort of things, arcs. Everything human or animal works in arcs. Robots work on, right angles and things. And so bridges, they have to have a different way of moving than the creatures, and Ray was a master at that.
The car on the bridge was lead, same as a bridge was mostly made of lead. And then as the girders crushed frame by frame, I had to put a wire in and have one girder fall off. So at each frame of film, as the octopus crushed it, this section of the bridge would be slid down on a wire to fall into the water. The writhing of the tentacles does give the impression of horror, I think, of being squeezed to death. If you have more than 1 or 2 tentacles showing, you have to keep them in motion, all slow moving, so that it gives the appearance that they aren't separate entities, that it all comes from one source. In the 50s, we never had the opportunity of having books written about stop motion. Everything you had to do and research was all kept it quiet because stop motion animation was not very popular. So I always do a lot of research and where I can, but there were no books on stop motion of shortcuts and things as there are today. And so it was a different situation. We had to invent by trial and error mostly. It was a question of devising new ways of doing things with a limited budget. If you have an unlimited budget, you can do anything you like.